You were promised a tax cut, but your bank account is about to reveal a much darker reality. While the headlines focus on the 2027 prosperity narrative, the actual math shows a hidden $900 charge hitting every middle-class family this year. This is not an accounting error. It is the signature of Stage 3 collapse. As of this morning, the latest data from the April 2026 Treasury reports confirms that the One Big Beautiful Bill Act has created a fiscal trap. While the top 1% are seeing their tax liabilities plummet, the average American household is being quietly redirected into a pocket trap designed to fund a historic $1.5 trillion defense expansion. Most people are missing the fact that a tax cut on paper can still be a massive loss in the real world. What we are seeing right now is the pivot from legislative tax policy to a $1,700 inflation tax driven by the new 2026 tariff regime. The pattern is clear. The money is being moved, and you are the one providing the liquidity. But this is where the story changes, because the $900 hike is just the visible part of the iceberg. What happens next is the real story, and it involves a total shift in how your daily costs are calculated. To understand why your tax bill is diverging from the campaign promises, we have to look at the legislative pivot that occurred in late 2025. The transition from the Biden-era credits to the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, OBBBA, was sold as a continuation of middle-class relief. But the architecture of this bill tells a different story. What the data actually shows is a sunset trap. While the 2017 tax provisions were extended for corporations, the specific credits that buffered middle-income households, like the health insurance defrayment, were allowed to expire quietly on January 1st. This wasn't an oversight. It was a strategic choice to shift the tax burden without raising the headline income tax rate. We are currently seeing the escalation path from Stage 2, fiscal expansion, into Stage 3, systemic extraction. The government is simultaneously facing a massive $1.5 trillion defense mandate and a widening deficit. To bridge that gap, the administration has pivoted to aggressive tariff enforcement. This brings us to the current moment, a dual front squeeze where your direct taxes go up by $900 while your indirect tariff tax begins to accelerate. But here is what that $900 number actually means for the broader economy, and it's the part most analysts are completely missing. The mechanism of this extraction is a legislative sleight of hand known as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, OBBBA. On the surface, it looks like a win, a permanent extension of the 2017 tax brackets, and a high-profile no tax on tips provision. But the step-by-step reality is different. Behind the scenes, the administration allowed the enhanced premium tax credits, the primary shield for middle-class health costs, to expire. This wasn't a mistake. It was a $187 billion liquidity harvest. The pattern here is one I've warned about before. Governments rarely raise taxes through direct hikes anymore because the political cost is too high. Instead, they use bracket creep and sunset traps. They give with one hand and let the shield expire with the other. The strategy is simple. Fund a historic $1.5 trillion defense expansion while keeping the corporate tax rate at a record low. But this is where the story changes. While everyone is focused on their 1040 forms, the real uncertainty is brewing in the supply chain. The administration is now moving to reimpose tariffs under Section 122, bypassing the courts. If you're finding these insights helpful and want to stay ahead of these patterns, hit the subscribe button. We're tracking the data the mainstream media won't touch. The uncertainty isn't just about what you pay the IRS. It's about how much of your paycheck will actually survive the next 90 days of retail price adjustments. This isn't just a domestic policy shift. It is a global recalibration. The decision to fund a $1.5 trillion defense mandate through aggressive tariffs signals a move away from the global trade era and into a period of strategic economic extraction. By placing a blockade on the Strait of Hormuz just this week, the administration isn't just targeting Iranian military movements. It's leveraging global energy flow to force a tariff tax into the domestic engine. What has structurally changed is the very definition of your purchasing power. In the old model, lower taxes meant more spending money. In the new Stage 3 model, your tax savings are being vacuumed up by a 94% drop in Hormuz commercial transits, which has already pushed Brent crude past $120 a barrel. This is a deliberate structural pivot, using international conflict to justify the inflation that pays for the $1.5 trillion military expansion. For you, this means the $900 you think you're saving on income tax is already being reallocated at the gas pump in the grocery store. When global energy markets face the greatest security challenge in history, as the IEA stated this morning, your wallet becomes the secondary battlefield. Most people are watching the headlines about the blockade. The real story is how that blockade is being used to solidify a defense-first economy that you are funding with every transaction. But this analysis goes deeper, because we need to look at what the decision makers are actually thinking behind closed doors. Inside the corridors of the newly renamed Department of War, the logic is as cold as it is consistent. Decision makers aren't viewing the $900 middle-class tax hike as a political risk. They are viewing it as a necessary capital call to fund a $1.5 trillion rearmament. The strategy is to front-load the costs of global dominance while the public is distracted by headline tax cuts that have already been hollowed out by the removal of repayment caps. Why is this happening now? Because the administration has calculated that the Strait of Hormuz blockade, which has pushed Brent crude to $120, serves as a secondary off-balance sheet tax. By allowing energy prices to spike, the government effectively forces a reduction in private consumption, redirecting that economic energy into the industrial defense base. This is the hallmark of Stage 3, systemic extraction. They aren't just taking your money through the IRS, they are devaluing your labor by increasing the cost of the very energy required to perform it. The long-term consequence is the creation of a, quote, fortress economy, where the middle class provides the floor for the national debt, while the wealthy exit into the protected $1 trillion in fresh tax cuts. This isn't a policy failure. It's a successful pivot toward a wartime fiscal footing that most people won't recognize until their 2027 filings arrive. But the other side tells a different story, and we need to examine that counter-argument before the full pattern becomes undeniable. The administration's economic architects argue that the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, OBBBA, is the ultimate middle-class relief package because it makes the 2017 tax brackets permanent and introduces a high-profile, no tax on tips policy. They contend that by boosting the defense budget to $1.5 trillion, they are creating a peace-through-strength dividend that will eventually stabilize global markets and lower long-term costs. From their perspective, the $900 increase isn't a hike, it's simply the normalization of the tax code after the expiration of temporary, inflationary Biden-era subsidies. They want you to believe that the localized pain of a $1,700 tariff tax is a small price to pay for bringing manufacturing back to American shores and securing the border. They argue that a stronger military and a permanent tax floor for corporations will eventually lead to a Stage 1 era of renewed growth. The precise gap in this logic is the math of immediate survival versus theoretical prosperity. While no tax on tips sounds transformative, it only affects a fraction of the workforce, whereas the $900 loss from health credit expirations and the $1,700 tariff tax hit 100% of middle-class households. The strategy is to distract you with a $200 increase in the child tax credit, while quietly extracting nearly $3,000 in combined annual purchasing power through energy and import costs. This gap matters because it proves the system isn't aiming for your growth, it's aiming for your compliance as it funds a massive military pivot. Here is what most analysts ignore. The macroeconomic shifts in the Strait of Hormuz and the One Big Beautiful Bill Act don't live in a spreadsheet, they live in your bank account. As of this week, the national average for gas has surged to $4.25 per gallon, with motorists in California already seeing prices north of $6. This is a direct 26% increase in your transportation costs compared to just 1 year ago. When oil stays above $100 due to the Iran conflict, every delivery truck in the country raises its rates, and those costs are passed directly to you within 72 hours. The tariff tax is even more aggressive. While the administration highlights a $900 direct tax shift, the Joint Economic Committee warns that new import levies will cost the average American household $2,512 this year alone. That is a 44% spike in the cost of everything from electronics to basic household goods. Even your grocery bill is under siege. Beef and veal prices are projected to climb by 10% in 2026 as supply chains tighten under the weight of trade restrictions and energy costs. This is the Stage 3 reality. Your borrowing costs remain pinned, with 30-year mortgage rates hovering at 6.4%. The tax cut narrative is the distraction. The extraction is happening at the pump, the checkout line, and through your monthly debt service. If you are noticing your purchasing power eroding despite the cuts, you aren't imagining it. You are experiencing the systemic reallocation of middle-class wealth to fund the new global defense reality. I'd love to hear from you. Are you seeing these $4 gas prices in your area yet? Drop a comment below with your local rate. It helps us track the real-time spread of this pattern. Now we need to look at exactly where this leads in the coming months. The pattern for 2027 is no longer a matter of debate. It is a matter of mathematical certainty. Based on the current trajectory of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act and the escalating Hormuz blockade, we are entering a period of dual extraction. Short-term scenario, 30 to 60 days. Expect retail gas prices to breach the $5 threshold nationally as the blockade's reality hits the just-in-time supply chain. This will be accompanied by the first wave of 1040 realization, where taxpayers filing for the 2025-2026 season realize that the expiration of health insurance credits has already neutralized their headline tax savings. The Fed will likely hold rates steady, effectively keeping your borrowing costs at decade highs to combat the very energy inflation the government's blockade is creating. Midterm scenario, 3 to 6 months. The $1.5 trillion defense ramp-up will begin to distort the labor market, drawing capital away from consumer sectors and into the military-industrial base. We predict a 70% probability of continued escalation, leading to a, quote, permanent price floor for groceries, where current 10% food inflation becomes the new baseline. There is only a 30% de-escalation path, which would require a negotiated maritime corridor, but even then, the $900 tax shift and $1,700 tariff burden are now hard-coded into the 2027 fiscal calendar. The trap is set. Most people will wait until their 2027 tax return to feel the shock. By then, the patterns I've shown you today will have already reshaped your financial reality. Stay disciplined, watch the data, and don't let the headlines distract you from the numbers in your own bank account. What happens next is the real story, and it's one that those who are prepared will survive.